Cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction. So essentially what I'm going to be doing here today is talking about the learnings that I had after failing a bunch of times. Essentially, that's what we're kind of distilling here. So before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about sort of my experiences and what's led to this information. So at school, I was always that annoying kid. I was that kid selling sweets to everyone else. After sweets, it turned into vending machines. And then vending machines, it started turning into e-commerce businesses. My first few businesses were unique and novel USB sticks. So that was called funky flash drives. And we drop shipped unique looking USB sticks, like ones that looked like a duck. And when you plugged it into the computer, the legs would start waddling. And essentially that led to a explosion of different business ideas. Sorry about the delay there. So just to reiterate, so essentially I worked on a series of different businesses from the time that I was at school to, I guess, my early to mid 20s. I think I was previously talking about funky flash drives, which was novelty and unique USB sticks. That progressed to a series of other businesses, one of which was Image to Painting, which was a platform where people could upload images to our website, get them professionally painted at that time in Vietnam, and posted to our client's house. Outside of that, I also ran a luxury hip flask business called X Flasks. And essentially what I was trying to do is understand the common patterns between successful and unsuccessful businesses. And what I realized is that whilst there's a lot of information out there, there's still a lot of things that you kind of have to learn yourself when growing. And during every failure and every success, I would write down these copious quantities of notes. And what this enabled me to do was actually figure out, what was missing out there. And this presentation is essentially the distilled result of that. So the goal here is to be super actionable, and hopefully you can apply this straight to your business. Now, if you have any questions whilst I'm talking, please feel free to let me know. Just message in the chat, and I will definitely get into that. So essentially what I ended up connecting to was growth marketing methodology. And if you look at a series of different startups that have become unicorns over the past few years, what you'll notice is that a lot of them implemented a lot of growth marketing methodology. And we'll get onto exactly what that is. But I believe it's this that has resulted in the rise of startups, and also what you can use yourself to grow your own startup. So I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of founders experience is they might have achieved product market fit, and they might have a clear goal on where they want to go. But their biggest challenge is actually, how do I get there? And that's the problem, because I think a lot of people, they can go to YouTube, for example, and find a great video on developing a customer persona. And they can also find a great video on setting up Google Ads. But really, the strategy comes into play when you're thinking about, how do I apply that customer persona to my Google Ads? And essentially, what we're going to be talking about here is how you can do that. Because really, this is probably the biggest area. It's actually the biggest challenge for a lot of founders isn't what to do, it's the uncertainty. It's not sure what steps they're supposed to take in order to achieve the goal that they're looking for. And hopefully this will provide a bit of a framework in achieving that. So before we get started, what I want to talk about, or as we think about this, what I want to talk about is actually what is a startup. Now, I really like this definition by Steve Blank. And if you haven't heard of his book, Customer Development, I think it's Customer Development Method. It's a fantastic startup manual on thinking about how businesses operate. So he defines a startup as an organization formed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. And I think it's really important to think about the fundamentals that make up that sentence. So repeatable and scalable. Repeatable being you can do your business again and again, and scalable in that if you insert certain inputs, the outputs will be linearly or compounding focused. So essentially what I realized is that when I was developing all these startup ideas, a lot of them failed because I was creating ideas that people didn't care about. I would go to people and I would say, hey, I've got this fantastic idea, right? It's going to sell, rent gnomes as a service. And my friends would be like, yeah, sure, that's a fantastic idea. I create a website, I'd start marketing it and realize that no one actually wants it. But because my friends had said they really like it, I got myself confused. I was kind of like, why aren't I getting any sales? And what I realized is that I was thinking too far ahead. What I really need to think about is the steps in between. So first of all, do people actually want what I have for them? And can they use it? So what I developed was the growth cycle. Now, this is a modification on many different methodologies, but essentially the goal is we have a series of ideas that we want to validate. Now, what we want to do is perform experiments to actually validate if our assumptions are true or false. so that we can gather real world data so that we can say with a certain degree of confidence that the idea works. And essentially, as you grow your startup, you continue the cycle. You just become more and more specific. And I'm going to walk you through each of these steps so that you can apply them to your business. So what I realized is that every fundamental marketing strategy or growth strategy essentially boils down to these four main questions. What is the problem I'm solving? How do I talk about the problem using the language that my customers do? What are the steps that a customer takes in order to find my product or service? And then who are the people that I'm selling the product to? So what I find really interesting is that there's actually a framework for each question, for solving each question. And this enables you to actually solve it and really think about it comprehensively. And by answering these four questions, you've got the bare bones basic of a strategy. And it's a very linear process. And I think there's a lot of templates online that talk to you about or talk about creating strategies, but I don't really think that they're very thought through. So hopefully this will help you in your business. And then once we've answered these four questions, the next step is to develop an experimentation model. So the first and most important question that I believe is the jobs to be done. For those who haven't heard, jobs to be done is a framework developed by a chap called Clayton Christensen, who I believe was a professor at Harvard. And essentially it looks at what is the core fundamental problem that your product or service is solving. And what I love to exemplify this is actually this product right here. So the image details a chap going over with a skateboard. Now, what he's trying to say is you don't buy the skateboard for the individual components. That's not what gets you excited. What gets you excited is the feeling of going over a jump. And you've got to think about that for your own products. People don't really care about your individual product, but they care about what it enables them to achieve. And I think that's essentially the core fundamental that I wish I knew right at the beginning. Now, the great thing about jobs to be done is actually there is a framework to help you understand this. Another example that we worked with a startup competitor to Salesforce a few years ago, and we were running ads that were generating very mediocre responses. And we ended up doing a lot of customer research. And during that customer research, we realized that a lot of our customers were early 30s, new parents, and we often caught them at the end of the day just before they went to pick up the kids. And just out of curiosity, I ended up creating some ads. And the copy of the ads was get home to your kids sooner. Now, for a product that is a SaaS enterprise software, that's very different to what they previously run. And what this enabled them to do was actually connect to the people using the products and solve a real problem. Didn't talk about the features or the functionality, but I think that's really important to identify the root problem, because essentially at the end of the day, your company solves a problem, and the product is just how you solve that, is how you present the solution to that problem. So that's really, really important. The next, and one of the most common issues that I also see, is misalignment in how you speak to your customers. So I think this is actually one of the biggest areas, because we all have, when we create a company, we have this idea of how our customers should talk about the problems that they're experiencing and the products that we serve. But really, that's not how people really work. And the more aligned we can really be with our customers in terms of messaging, the more effective we will be at ensuring we can actually sell to them more effectively, and we can communicate with them using their language. And that's a really difficult task, because we spend all day, every day, talking about our products using our own language. So when someone talks about it something different, it can be very, very difficult. So there's two things here. One is, an example that I had a while ago was essentially I was working with a e-commerce platform, and when I was working in the company, everyone I was working with was a developer, and they kept telling me about how fast the product was, how efficient it was. So we were targeting using technical language to a lot of these people. But what I ended up doing is having an in-person conversation with one of the customers, and we had a beer. I asked him, how would you describe the product to your friend after a couple of pints? And he said, it's a shop in one line of code. And I thought that's really interesting, because we don't talk about that. We just talk about how fast the JavaScript is and things like that. And so I stumbled back to the office and I updated one of our Google ads. And what I realized is that, a bit like get home to your kids sooner, this connected to them on a lot more fundamental level. And what that resulted was much more engagement, much more interest, and much more excitement. Now, figuring out how people speak about your product can be really difficult. A good way is just to speak to them and ask them questions and trying to understand the language they use. But I also like to use this document here, which is a strategic messaging map. And that allows us to think about how do you communicate about your product in a way that's very organic. So you start from the very broad statements at the top, and you work your way to become more and more specific as you work your way down. I'll also send this presentation so that people can access the downloads. So with 2 questions down, Next, we got how do people find the solution? So unfortunately, when someone wakes up in the morning, they don't immediately think about your company or service. I wish they did. I wish we could tell people about it in their dreams, but alas, that's not possible yet. So what we want to try and figure out is what are the steps what are the steps from when someone wakes up in the morning to becoming an active and loyal user of your product and service. And there's a few reasons why we do this. The first is we want to figure out how to develop a relationship with our customer. And I use that word really carefully because if we go to the person who we're trying to sell to and we say, buy our product, as soon as they may possibly be experiencing the problem that they're trying to solve, they're going to say, who are you? I don't know you. I don't trust you. I don't value you. Now, if we start to solve problems, then that helps. Then we can develop a relationship with them. So what does that mean? So essentially what that means is when someone wakes up, they don't always think about what is the problem that I'm trying to solve. What they think about is I'm experiencing a problem. So for example, someone might wake up with a certain level of anxiety, and it might be because they feel like they're not able to achieve the goals that their boss is setting them. So they might ask in their friend WhatsApp group. They might go to a Facebook group and try and figure out how to develop the relationship with the boss. They might think about communication. They might think about productivity, and they might think about a bunch of other things. If they continue thinking about productivity, they might think about how do I maybe organize myself better? How do I do my job more efficiently? And if they're thinking about how do I do my job more efficiently, they might start thinking about what tools can I invest in that will help me achieve that goal. Might be a bit of a bad analogy, but essentially what we're trying to understand is that actually at every stage of their journey, they're trying to understand how to solve the problem. So really what we want to do is start introducing ourselves before before we can sell to them and say, hey, we exist and we understand that you're stressed about, maybe how do I improve my relationship with my boss? So here's a blog article. And then later on, as they start thinking about productivity, maybe we want to create a webinar on how to make yourself super efficient in your day-to-day process. And these different steps enable us to develop a relationship with our customers so that by the time they say, actually, your product seems pretty cool. I understand what they know who we are, what we do, and the value that we provide, and they're ready to make that buying decision. And we can do that using a customer journey map, a user journey map. There's a bunch of different documents online, a bunch of different templates. And as you go through these different templates, I think it's really important to understand that the documents, a lot of people are really scared to create these because they're worried if they don't create something perfect. Now, what I try to say to that is don't worry about the first version that you create. The goal isn't to create a perfect version. The goal is to update it as regularly as possible as you develop an understanding about your customer. And what that means is as you communicate more with your customer, as you sell more to your customer, you'll understand there are certain bits that are less accurate than others. What you want to do is then make changes to the document. And it's through that process of constantly updating that you will ensure that these documents are as useful as possible. And as a customer goes through different stages, they're going to use different tools. So what we might realize is actually, when they're trying to solve this specific problem, we might target them on Google Ads. Here, they might ask questions within a Facebook group. Maybe we want to develop a community that solves a problem as they develop an understanding of the problem. As they progress further, maybe we want to create a blog article. It really depends on the kinds of problems that the customer is trying to solve before they reach our product and how best we can meet them along that journey. So I talked about how do we communicate using the language of the customer, what is the problem the customer experiences, and what are the steps that a user takes before discovering our product. And eventually, we also have to think about who is the customer. So who is the customer really ties into what is the problem we're solving because it's generally a specific group. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this because the customer persona is probably the most spoken about aspect, but I will give you a few learnings that I experienced, which was first, the more specific your persona, the better. I think it's really difficult to focus on a specific niche because we're worried we might exclude potential customers, particularly early stages in our business. But really, the more specific your audience, the more likely you are to succeed. Second, rather than focusing on demographics, always focus on like psychographics, which is what is the emotional problems that someone's trying to solve? Because we essentially we solve problems based on emotion. Every decision we make is based on emotion. We're trying to solve an emotion, and then we use action to do that. If we can understand what that emotion is for our customers, then we can understand how to connect with them more effectively. And the other side of it is also creating an anti-persona. So I like to create personas of people who we don't want to work with. And that helps us ensure that we're really refined along that journey. What I also want to say is that people are data. So a lot of people hear about data-driven marketing. Now, I run an agency, and as an agency, we're very data driven. Not because that's the best buzzword, but because that's frankly the easiest method. By You can turn user behavior into numbers, and by understanding those numbers, you can then create more effective campaigns. And I think that's just a generally really important concept that I want to ensure people remember. I'll share the presentation so people can read the individual quotes, but I really love this quote: "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And there's a lot of different things that we can think about when thinking about data. But one is attribution. How do people find us? Once they visit our product or service, what do they do? How do they behave? And to what degree are we achieving the goals that we've set out for ourselves? Do let me know how I'm doing on time, because I love the sound of my own voice and I don't want to go too far. So now, with data alone, it's really difficult to make any decisions. But the great thing is that there is a process. So the way that I like to look at it is essentially we have our data, and here are some examples. And then what we want to do is look at that data and actually derive some insights. And then from those insights, we actually make better decisions. So if we look at data here, for example, we might look at open rates for different email campaigns or CPCs for different ad campaigns. Now, on its own, it's really difficult to figure out what value this might present to us. But what we might do is look at this in context and actually say, well, if we look at all of them, emails sent on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. have the highest open rates. Now, what that means is every time we want to email people, we should probably focus on that time. And it's important to develop a mindset that enables us to think about marketing from a very data-driven perspective. And a good way, the very basic way of interpreting data is through this methodology. If anyone has any questions, feel free to message in the chat. So one thing that I find really easy, when you start a startup, it's more than just working for someone. You're emotionally vested in the success or failure of that company. And what I think is really important is making sure that we don't let that sort of emotional bias stop us from focusing on the wrong things. So what I like to do is make sure that we focus on meaningful metrics and not vanity metrics. So essentially what I mean by that is it's really important as we're thinking about data, numbers, and everything, that we think about how do we focus on the stuff that's most connected to the goals that we're trying to achieve. So rather than stuff like page views, which feel really nice, how many social media followers, which might have some indication, what I really recommend is focusing on stuff that has a big impact on the success or failure of your business. Now, there's a whole process here about growth marketing, and we can turn that into experiments. So we can turn all the ideas that we've had into specific steps. To do that, we need to first understand what growth marketing is, and next we need to talk about how to think about numbers in a bit more detail. So this is a definition that I like to use, but essentially it's a experimentation process to help us validate assumptions about what works. And the goal really is to drive sustainable business growth. And I think that's the biggest difference between growth marketing and what is commonly known as growth hacking. And the reason why I like it is because startups have no money, but they have really big goals. And this is a really efficient way to spend money and to achieve those goals. Now, when someone visits our product, it's really important that we understand what is the user journey. Now, we talked a little bit about the user journey a little bit earlier with the user journey map, but we can break down each stage into different sections following awareness, considering purchase, retention, and advocacy. Now, this is based on a framework by a guy called, I think it's Brian Balfour who created this. No, Dave McClure. This is called the Pirate Metrics, because it's based on that. So awareness is essentially at what stage someone becomes aware of your brand. Next is when they start thinking about which service do I want to go for. Purchase is when someone actually purchases the product. Retention is when someone buys your products again and again. And advocacy is when someone tells other people about your product. So for the sake of time, because we're going over, I'm going to pause that there. But what I want you to do is take a look through the framework and let me know if you have any questions. What I really like about answering these 4 questions, if we go back to where we were, was by understanding what is the problem we're trying to solve, by understanding who are the people that we're trying to speak to using the language that they experience, and by understanding the steps that someone takes before they become a user of our product, it enables us to understand what channels do we want to speak to our customers on, what messages do we want to use to speak to those customers, how do we talk to them using the language that they speak, and by making sure that we focus on the fundamental problems that they experience. And this has formed the foundation, a bit like building a house. You can't build a house without a foundation. This enables us to build that foundation. And it has helped me build successful companies. So thank you very much. And do feel free to message me if you have any further questions.